Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sree Iyer. Today I have a brand new guest, senior journalist Chris Blackburn, and he's not a stranger to our audiences. He has been on several TV channels as well as social media channels. Chris follows India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, United Kingdom, Canada, and United States with a focus on how some of the minorities are being treated in various countries. So he is an excellent person to weigh in on what is happening between India and Canada, new challenges with a new India. So let's first welcome Chris, and I also have Utsav Chakrabarti. So let's say hello to both gentlemen. Chris, first, welcome to PGurus channel for the first time. Namaskar.
Thank you for having me, Sree. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So I look forward to a very engaging conversation, Chris, and we are looking at it from a slightly different angle, and let's see how things develop from here in terms of Canada and India. So first of all, before I go with the first question to you, Chris, I'd like to also invite Utsav Chakrabarti. Utsav, pleasure to have you back again on our channel.
Namaste, Sree, and glad to see you, Chris. Been a follower of your work for a really long time. Good to see you.
So, Chris, you are an impartial observer in this new storm in the teacup between Canada and India. It may not be a storm in the teacup. It may take on a bigger dimension, but I want to try and underplay things to start with. How do you see this thing? How did things come to this? Over to you.
Hi. Well, I think to people that followed the issue, the Khalistan issue, over the last sort of 20 years, what we've seen is that Canada has dragged its feet on numerous investigations, and it became such a big story after obviously there was the Air India bombing of Air Flight 182 in 1975. We saw that the Canadian, 85, that the Canadians didn't understand the threat. They botched the investigation. So in 2010. The government, after a long sort of period of consultation, the Canadian government itself did an inquiry into the bombing and how the intelligence breakdown happened between the Canadian Royal Mounted Police and obviously the CCSIS, which is the Canadian External Agency. So they looked at the problems. And what we saw was the Canadians didn't have the right attitude, they didn't have the right intelligence, or they got the intelligence and they weren't looking at it properly. So I think the Canadians, for them, it's a matter of pride. And I think that inquiry in 2010 really wounded Canadian intelligence. But rather than starting a new period of new behavior within the intelligence services of Canada, what we saw is that the Canadians have dragged out issues. So when you look at it from the Indian side, the Canadians have claimed, oh, well, you're not providing us with the right intelligence, you're not providing evidence, which we know is wrong, because what the National Investigative Agency, the NIA in India, has given Interpol and other nations exact evidence about what these Khalistani terrorists were doing in Canada. So I think what we're seeing is this is all playing out. And obviously, for us that have monitored the situation and have watched it happen, this isn't a surprise to us. This Canadian and Indian spat, because we knew where it was going. The Canadians have refused to engage. They refused to extradite people who we know to be terrorists. And the NIA and other agencies in India have been really, really disappointed with those results. So now that it's become an issue where the UK and Australia and America are now looking at the issue, and they've even made an acronym which shows you how serious a government is taking a situation when they say PKE, the pro-Khalistan extremism. When somebody like Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, says that in interviews, you know that governments are taking things seriously. So what I think will happen is, if Canada doesn't come up with any evidence, and what we've seen from sort of Five Eyes partners, the sort of English-speaking intelligence network around the world, what we've seen from them is the Financial Times came up with an article where basically officials off record said, well, these are all just allegations. They haven't provided any evidence to us so far. So I think what we'll see is, unless Canada and unless Justin Trudeau provides any kind of substantial evidence, what we will see is Canada getting put into the doghouse, and rightly so.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I would come back to you with my next question, and let's just welcome Utsav. Utsav, you've been looking at the NCRI report that came a few months ago about this whole Khalistan issue. And I have a slide deck for you, and you can do an intro statement now. And if you want me to put up the slide deck, I'll be happy to do so. Over to you, sir.
Sure, please go ahead and put up the slide. And I firstly thank Chris for giving such a beautiful perspective, which is based on very reasonable events that are, analysis of events that are happening right now. But see, I want to take the aspect of how this ego trip of Justin Trudeau is affecting the diaspora communities from India, which include Sikhs. What I am afraid of is that this is going to impact Hindu Americans, Hindu Canadians, and Sikh Americans and Sikh Canadians, and people of Indian origin in a very, very negative way, because already what you see on the screen is an analysis done by NCRI, Network Contagion Research Institute from the Rutgers University, who came out with a report in April this year. And the report was based on analysis of more than about 8 months of findings. And I would urge everybody, Sree, and maybe you can put a link in the audience
I will.
So everybody in the audience should go through this report, because it didn't get the coverage it should have gotten. And Washington Post did carry an article on this, on the findings. And what is really scary for everybody is that the rhetoric that is on social media coming from the Khalistani cult members, which is very high and very aggressive, usually is followed by physical attacks on Hindu temples or Indian government consulates or government buildings, and even individuals, as was seen in California and the Taco Bell. So there is this whole track record, and this is a screenshot of one of the pages. It's a 32-page report from NCRI, and it tells you that before every major attack on a Hindu temple in which things are vandalized or people are attacked, there is a spike in social media tweeting from the bot accounts that are associated with the Khalistan cult movement. And this is scary because right now, as you can see, there was a video released by SFJ and Gurpatwan Singh Pannu, which openly calls and threatens Hindus in Canada to go back to India, and literally asks them to, this is reminiscent of 1930s Europe, where Nazis would literally tell Jews to leave their countries. And if this doesn't go down properly in the minds of the Trudeau administration, I think there's a serious problem brewing here. And not just in Canada, I would say it's in America as well, because Canada and America share a border. And in the past, in San Francisco, in the East Coast, in New York, there has been a record of Canadian activists from the Khalistan cult moving back and forth between the two countries. So I'm concerned from the American perspective, because I'm a resident of Washington, D.C. and Peter Frederick did a video on me a couple of months ago. So it's a scary situation, and I hope saner minds prevail in Canada and Justin Trudeau walks back some of the things he's doing.
Thank you so much. And let's get back to let me get back to Chris for a moment here. Chris, I have a question for you. He mentioned Pannu. And there have been talk in the media that Pannu might be getting funding from, of all places, China, especially the CCP. You've done a lot of research around this area. What are your thoughts? Do you think that in addition to what we've always been alleging as the alphabet soup organizations of, that exist in US and Canada, now I'm hearing more and more that the Chinese also are funding this organization, Sikhs for Justice, and Pannu specifically. How does your research work? Add up to there? What is your research point?
Well, I'm actually working on a research project on the sort of Sikhs for Justice reaching out to Canada, reaching out to China, both nations that are a problem. So I think our research, what we found, we haven't found evidence of actual money exchanges or anything like that. But what we've seen is the Sikhs for Justice have constantly, from the last sort of decade, reached out to Chinese ambassadors. They've reached out to President Xi Jinping, and what we've seen is whenever there's been sort of attacks in Pakistan, that Sikhs for Justice would openly say, we support the people of China, we support their struggle against sort of facing up to India and all these kinds of things. So in that context, we've also seen that there are Chinese sort of cybersecurity firms which have been sanctioned by the US Department of Defense for being part of the Chinese sort of hybrid warfare and propaganda apparatus of China. We've seen direct links and evidence that the Chinese government has been providing support for separatists and the Sikhs for Justice movement. So for anybody who's interested in the actual Khalistan movement, the very background and how it was started was because of Bhutto in Pakistan. He wanted revenge for the liberation war and the independence of Bangladesh in 1971. So he created and he pushed people in the United States, people like Chauhan. He pushed these guys to basically ask and push and be violent against India. So we've seen these linkages with Pakistan, and they're documented. But what I think we're beginning to see, and especially as the sort of Chinese think tanks are getting involved in looking at the separatist issues in India, as obviously China and India are becoming confrontational, we are seeing Chinese think tanks beginning a push and support Khalistanis. And I think that's an interesting subject, which I think is very sort of pertinent to how the globe tackles this new Khalistan issue. Because if these guys are potentially acting as Chinese agents now, we've already seen that they've got intention to want to support the Chinese. I think it becomes a counterintelligence problem in the United States, Canada, the UK, and everywhere else.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I will come back to you with a question, and I'm just going to give you the question so you have some time to think about it. Who stands to lose more, Canada or India, in this patch? So please think about it while I go to Utsav. And Utsav, the next question to you is the NCRI findings. If I can just put up the slide here for your information, I just want to ask you a small question. See, this is their summary. Basically, they gave you bullet points in a summary. Why are these people, Sikhs, that is the Khalistanis, taking aim at their own brethren? After all, Sikhs and Hindus have shared a common history for thousands of years. Sikhs are nothing but Veer Hindus. Sikh means Shiksha, Shishya. So that means a student or a pupil. And from there, this extreme narrative, plus they are now essentially taking aim at a party that had nothing to do with the 1984 Sikh riots and the attack on Golden Temple, which the Congress did. And somehow they've managed to brainwash the new generations that are growing up in Canada and the US that it is the BJP that did all this stuff. How did this brainwashing and the total 180-degree change come about, Utsav?
So let me first say that the Khalistan movement at this point is a separatist cult. It has very little sanction, or for that matter, very little support in majority of the Sikh community. That I just want to make sure that everybody who is watching this show and everybody who follows this issue, including Canadians and Justin Trudeau, understand that it is a cult movement. It is a separatist cult. And if I were to explain this to the Western audience in terms of historical comparisons, and I usually say, and I say it very respectfully, that Sikhs are the Knights Templars of the Hindu community, and that is literally, in my understanding, the historical parallel if we were to compare it to the Western historical narrative. So, and the history of Knights Templar, that there was a section that became extremist, and they had a collusion with the European governments. monarchs of that time, and they were eventually eliminated. So unfortunately, the Khalistan cult is extremely violent. It has a history of extreme violence from the 1980s. It has a history of towing the Pakistani ISI narrative on India. And when you have that narrative, it doesn't matter who is in power. I have seen that between the transition of the Manmohan Singh government to the Modi government, the same Khalistani activist would come to a rally in 2013 holding a poster against Manmohan Singh, and overnight his poster changes to that of Narendra Modi. He probably doesn't know either one of them or doesn't know the politics of either one of them. But the Khalistani activist in Canada or US or any other part of the Western world is following a set narrative. But what is more concerning is that, in my understanding, the Khalistani of the 1980s and the 90s was an anti-India separatist extremist. Today, the Khalistanis in the West, especially in Canada and America, are anti-Hindu extremists. So they have morphed from becoming an anti-India movement that was fully supported and funded to some extent by the Pakistani ISI. They have morphed into an anti-Hindu rhetoric-based movement. With the younger generation, most of them don't read Punjabi Gurmukhi. They don't read their scriptures either. And that is one of the reasons why they carry the narrative and the propaganda that they find online from usually the Islamic extremist groups. So, you will see the Khalistani young men abusing Hindus of like monkey worshippers and cow piss drinkers, narratives that you hear in Al-Qaeda and Jamaat-e-Islami groups against Hindus. And, when you point out to them, hey, do you know that the king, the greatest Sikh king on whose name you do this work in your mind, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, his standard flag had Hanuman, Hindu deity Hanuman, as the flag symbol, and they will just abuse you after that because they can't justify history, their own history, and reconcile with their fellow Hindus. So this is a very sad and a very disconnected, violent movement. It has nothing to do with any historical grievance. It is really tragic. But we are where we are, and we have to deal with what we have in front of us. And that is what I say, Sree, is it's important to engage with them. It is important for people like Trudeau to understand this, because people like Trudeau are actually fueling a movement that might someday consume Canada as well, because these kinds of violent movements don't have, look at the Taliban and take a lesson from it. It will bite many hands. Look at Al-Qaeda. This can transform into something like that. I hope Justin Trudeau understands that.
Thank you so much, Utsav. And I'm going to give you with a question while I go back to Chris. And the question is, I saw a notification that the visa section of the Toronto Embassy of India has been temporarily closed. Maybe you can think about the ramifications for the common citizen who wants to go back to India for a natural disaster, a natural family emergency, or whatever. Think about that. Do you think this is a short term or a long term, and the implications? So I come back to you on that one. So Chris, who stands to lose more, India or Canada, from this pact?
Well, I think Canada is probably going to stand to lose a great deal, because as we all know, India's on the rise. We've got basically countries, European countries, North American companies, everybody's queuing up to get part of the sort of the India growth and the India future. And I think it's on multiple levels as well. It's not just business, it's culture, it's defense, you name it. Everybody wants to get on board the Tiranga Express. And I think the Canadians have basically shot themselves in the foot. And I think from what Utsav was saying, obviously on stealing a bit of his question, I think that the Khalistanis are using Islamists and using their rhetoric. But what we're seeing happening is it's on multiple levels. We're seeing like trolls and people abusing people on Twitter. But we're also seeing actual organizations working with Khalistanis on a higher level, on a higher political level. And that is also reaching to politicians as well. In the UK, we've got the Sikh Federation UK, and they've glorified the murders in British schools and all kinds of horrendous things. Yet they are the secretariat of an all-parliamentary group in the British Parliament, right? And the reason they're there is because nobody's really understood the Khalistani movement in the UK, and nobody's called them out for it. So I think that what we're going to see is, going forward, we're going to see a lot of more people taking this as an interest, and a lot of the sort of the counter-terrorism groups in the UK and Europe are now looking into it. So I think it's an area of study I think we need to look at. How does it come from the top all the way at the bottom and back up again?
Thank you so much, Chris. I think you just suggested the next topic for our discussion, and we will do that in a couple of weeks' time. Actually, hold on to your horses. I'll reach out to you on that one. Certainly a fascinating one. I have some inputs also on that. So, Utsav, temporary cessation of visa section in the Toronto Embassy of India. Is it short-term, or is it long-term, or is it just plain posturing? But how does it inconvenience the individuals? Will they have to cross over from Toronto into United States to apply for visas? What are your thoughts?
I think it is really unfortunate, but I'm sure that there must have been intelligence or some inputs in the Indian government for them to have taken this step on a short notice. I hope and I believe it should be on a short notice, and it's for a short period of time. And it really inconveniences a lot of people who have families in India. It inconveniences a lot of businesses who are trying to. India is one of the fastest growing big economies in the world, and Canadian companies have a lot of business that they do in India. So it's unfortunate, but I have to say this, that Canadians have to understand that this is not something between India and Canada. It is something between Justin Trudeau and India. And, Canada is becoming a sacrificial lamb at the altar of Justin Trudeau's ego. And I think this is important for everybody to understand. And it is important for the White House to understand. India and America has worked very hard over the years, because it's not been easy. India is not a country that changes its foreign policy postures very quickly. But when it does change and it moves towards a certain country, it carries a momentum with it. And India has been moving towards the American geopolitical position over the years with the momentum behind it. And there were a lot of impediments. I have been living in this city for 20 years, and I saw how things have been changing in favor of a better US-India relationship. So I hope the White House and the US administration also understands at this point that it's not worth sacrificing years and years of work over a young prime minister's ego.
Thank you so much, Utsav. Last word from you, Chris, and then we'll call it a wrap.
I think basically countries are the one they're looking at. China and India is a major part of that confrontation. And then you've also got the second most biggest point for me is Canada knows these guys that have been operating on their soil have been engaged in terrorism, right? So that really puts the onus on the Canadians to help sort out the problem. Now, if other nations like the UK and the US and Australia and others have got it, right, what is stopping the Canadians? And Utsav is right. It's probably Justin Trudeau's ego, because anybody that knows Canadian politics weren't surprised about this development. So I think going forward, I think if no evidence comes about, I think India will play hardball on this issue, and they rightly should, because there does need to be a change in behavior in Canada, and they're holding out on it. So I think going forward, what we will see, hopefully, will be a change of behavior and potentially a change of leadership in the Canadian political realm.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much, Utsav. And viewers, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click on the bell button for notifications. And we would love for both of you to come back to our panel here and discuss this, because this is just the beginning of a long saga, I'm afraid. And viewers, you can pitch in by asking questions. This is a recording. Next time we may make it live. But if you do ask questions in this via comments, we will try and accommodate some of those questions in the next live hangout that I'm hoping to have with two of you gentlemen. So please do participate. Send in your questions, send in your comments, tell us what we could be doing better. Thank you once again. Namaskar. Bye.